Good morning, everybody. Monday morning, we are finishing Matthew this week. Wow, what a yes! I see here another long and heavy one that we just went through. It is it is another long chapter with a lot of stuff going through. So let's get right to it. This is like we said, we're approaching the end, and we've got some good news on the next chapters. So, well, this is all good news, but obviously, this is a crazy one. So here we go. Let's get started with, all right, the beginning. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate. They didn't need to bind him. They didn't need to tie him up. He was willingly just doing everything that they were saying. And so this was a little excessive, but of course, they didn't want any of this where he would get away from them. In fact, maybe they bounded him because so many times they tried to get him before, and he would just walk away from them. And so he walked with such authority, he always got out of their hands. So maybe now they're thinking, okay, we need to bind him up. Maybe that's why. And then we see, then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? It's like, this is not our problem. You do whatever you want with the money. We don't care anymore. We got him. And so then obviously he threw down the pieces of silver. This is the very money that he had, this love of money that was the very thing that got him to turn them to these guys, and now he's throwing it on the ground. What the very thing that he needed, or he loved the most, he just couldn't do it anymore. And it's kind of interesting because with Andrew Wommack, he's saying that this was not a remorse where he actually turned to God and changed his way. This was more of like, okay, this was innocent blood, but not so much turning back to Jesus, seeing the words that were used here in this. But it was very interesting because I always thought, a long time ago, I would think like, man, he did change his heart, and God, did he end up making to heaven? But we know by the scriptures that he did not. And so who knows what took place. I mean, we know that he went and hung himself. And then we also see in another book that it was a pretty gruesome end to his life. But chief priest took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury because they are a price of blood. And so these guys even knew that he was an innocent guy. Well, he was innocent in many ways. They couldn't get him they couldn't prove that he was guilty of anything other than when Jesus said, I am God. And to them, that was blasphemy, and that was worthy of it. But they didn't even want to use that money, and they consulted together and bought with them potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field had been called the field of blood to this day. And this fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet. This is actually in Zechariah, but maybe Jeremiah had spoken it first and then Zechariah. We just don't have any record of it being in Jeremiah, but it is in Zechariah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field. And the Lord directed me. So this you will find in Zechariah. And then it continued. Now Jesus stood before the governor. So this is now the second trial, and this is the civil trial, not the religious trial. The governor asked him, saying, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, it is as you say. And now again, the chief priests, they were all absolutely angry at this. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear the many things they testify against you? But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. This is amazing that the governor was absolutely impressed by this, because Jesus is now he has the ability to stand up for himself, to fend for himself, but he doesn't want to. Jesus doesn't want to be released. It's like he knows that God is playing chess and is putting Satan into a checkmate. And so Jesus just stayed quiet there. And absolutely amazing here just to see what was taking place. I just want to see, I think I had a comment here. Yeah, okay, let's just keep going. Oh, here was, we'll go into this a little bit further with Hebrews and where that goes in, because we have plenty of chance to go to this. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroyed. Oh, wait, I jumped a lot here. All right. So then the feast of the governor was a custom of releasing to the multitude one prisoner from whom they wished. And so then there was this guy named Barabbas. Now, this is kind of funny because I always catch myself almost cheering for Jesus to be released. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release, Barabbas or Jesus?" And of course, they all cried out for Barabbas. This is an interesting sentence. For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. So here Pilate can tell why they were doing this. Even Pilate could see that it was because of their envy that they were getting rid of Jesus. For Pilate to have the eyes of that is pretty outstanding. So the people of God are doing this out of envy for Jesus. And so they're cheering for Barabbas. And now Pilate has his wife coming to him and saying, "I've had nothing, he says, "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I've suffered many things today in a dream because of Jesus." But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. So Pilate had the opportunity to listen to his wife. We probably all have that opportunity to listen to our wives and do what's right, but he didn't. And he didn't want to. The governor answered and said, "Which of the two do you want me to release?" And so here I often say it's like if we're cheering for Jesus, hey, no, don't crucify Jesus. Release him. If you can release one of them, release Jesus. Not Barabbas. But this was actually, it needed to be done. It needed to take place. There's just a really interesting thing about Barabbas is that we are all Barabbas. There's this really song, this song by Josiah Queen about "I am Barabbas," and what an interesting view on that. I just want to see. I think I have it here. Verse 26. Yeah. So he saw this, and so then what he did is, what we'll get to 26. All the people answered and said, "His blood be on us and our children." Wow, this is crazy that the people who were saying Hosanna, Hosanna, they're now turning and saying, yeah, you know what? He's not the one. Get rid of him. He's not the Savior, obviously. And so then they released Barabbas to them. And when he was scourged, when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered them to be crucified. So here, really interesting, because Barabbas was a type of the whole human race. We were all guilty and condemned to death, but Jesus took our place. He was innocent, and we were guilty, yet he suffered the punishment we should have gotten, and we go free. What a great salvation. So it's kind of funny because so many times I read this and I'm thinking, no, the story's not going to change. Obviously, this took place some 2,000 years ago. And yet we're still cheering for Jesus to be the one to be released, but God didn't. He did not want Jesus to be released. He knew that he was putting Satan into a checkmate. He knew what was taking place. So then the soldiers, the governor, took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. It was like 600 men. They stripped him, put a scarlet robe on him, and when they had twisted a crown of thorns, this is really interesting. They twisted a crown of thorns. When Adam and Eve sinned, it brought thorns onto the planet, and thorns were were a symbol of the curse. And now the curse is being put on Jesus's head. Isn't that crazy? Just to see that now in full circle, the curse is being used to be put on his head. They put on his head and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed the knee before him, mocking him, saying, "Hail to the King of Jews," and they spat on him. They took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took their robes off of him, put his own clothes on him, and led him to be crucified. This makes me think of Hebrews 12:2, one of my favorite verses about Jesus. Hebrews 12:2 says, "For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame." So Jesus, he put himself in this situation. He was the one that incriminated himself by saying, "I am he, I am the Son of God." And so he was the one doing this. He wasn't fighting it. He didn't talk back. He didn't try to defend himself. And he did all this for the joy that was set before him. What is that joy that was set before him? That's you and me. The joy that was set before him is our kids, is all of us who have the opportunity and the chance to give our life to Christ. That was the joy that was set before him, who endured the cross, despising the shame. This was that shame that he despised, and even the shame up on the cross that he was there, and despising that time on the cross. But it was that joy that made him just do this with such authority, and yet just absolutely be mocked and hit. And then he was whipped and go through all the whipping and taking the sickness up on the cross. He did all of that for us as we were that joy that was set before him. It's such a beautiful picture in Hebrews, and I love that part. Now, as they came out, they found a man in Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled him to bear his cross. And when they had him come to a place called Golgotha, which is the place of the skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink. So some people think that with this gall, we don't really have record of what gall is, other than they think it's kind of something to dull the pain. But Jesus didn't want to take this drink. He didn't want to take it. He wanted to feel the full pressure of the sin and the hurt and everything. He wanted to do that for us. What an interesting perspective to see it that way. We see them also offer him vinegar later, but they didn't say anything about gall. So just to see that this time Jesus was like, no, he didn't want it, just because he wasn't going to be taking anything that helped him dull the pain. Then they crucified him, divided his garments, casting the lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided the garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they watched over him there, and they put over his head the accusation written against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. This is what he incriminated himself with, and that's what they put on there, and that's what they got him with. And so then the two robbers were crucified with him, one on the right hand. It doesn't really go further into this. I think it's Luke that goes into showing one of the robbers up on the cross talking to Jesus and having a conversation with him, but not here. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroys the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also mocking. So here, to the very many people who were saying Hosanna, they were saying Hosanna, Hosanna, and all this, they all of a sudden turned on him. And so if we were there, we would have been like, okay, with the perspective that they had, they thought that Jesus was the one coming to conquer the Romans. They also thought that he was going to be the one that was building this temple, and he didn't build the temple. Now he's on the cross. And now, like, there's all of this, and they're thinking, okay, it wasn't him. It's not him. Let's keep our eyes open for somebody else. It's kind of like when you're, following your sports team of some sort, and now that they're not making the playoffs. And so you kind of, you were kind of hopeful all season, and now there's a point where your hope turns to dismay, and you just kind of accept it, and you're like, nah, I guess they're not doing it this year. Next year. It'll be next year. Well, I see that all the people that were saying Hosanna, Hosanna, all these people who are now mocking him, and they're wagging their fingers at him and everything, that they were like, man, he's the one that's coming to conquer Rome, and he's the one that's going to build the temple. And now that they see him now on the cross, they're like, nah, I guess he's not the one. Now, never mind the fact that the shepherds were talked by the angels when he was born. Never mind all the stories that took place, all the miracles that took place. I'm not saying it's everybody, because there's probably some people in Capernaum and, other places that Jesus ministered that are not saying this or not thinking this, but yet this was the majority, because they're probably thinking, oh, I guess, okay, he's not the one. He's not the one that is conquering Rome. All right, on to the next one. He was a great guy, did a lot of miracles, a lot of great things, but he's blaspheming, and, he's saying that he's God. The Pharisees probably could have sat down with Jesus and could have talked to Jesus and been like, tell us more and show us these scriptures that say that you are the Son of God. Like, let's look into this, because there's a lot of prophecies that seem to be getting fulfilled. They could have done that. But even the disciples, it took Peter 3 years for him to realize, Jesus is the Son of God. When Jesus asked him, and he said, you weren't shown that except for by my Father. And so for the disciples to take 3 years to understand that, of course, the people saying Hosanna and all the Pharisees, they weren't getting. In fact, Jesus said, but I don't want you telling anybody, because Jesus knew he had to go on the cross. So, of course, it was good that Jesus didn't sit down with the Pharisees and show them all the scriptures, all the prophecies and everything that took place. He needed this to take place. And so now, just to see, where would I have been? Would I have been one of the ones saying Hosanna and now one of the ones condemning him? Probably, because my perspective would have been like, he didn't conquer. He didn't build a new temple. So I guess he's one of those weird whacks, And so to say, to look at this story, now we can see it in 2020 in hindsight. But at that point, it would have been difficult. And so then he was on the cross. And now that 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And then this verse, and about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, Jesus said this, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because it was actually a scripture from Psalms 22. And so Jesus was now reiterating Psalms 22. This wasn't Jesus asking God why he forsook him. Jesus actually knew why he forsook him, because in Psalms 22, 3, verse 3, he says why. And so if we go to Psalms 22, you almost think like Jesus is asking God, like, why is he forsaking him? He's not. Look, there's a quotation from Psalms 22:1. It says, this is a psalm of David. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? And then verse 22, he keeps on saying, and then verse 23, here's the answer. But thou art holy, O thou the inhabitants. Where it speaks of God being holy, the reason God forsook Jesus was because God is holy and Jesus became sin for us. And Jesus knew that. He was just reiterating what David had prophesied about this time. And so God forsook us because of our sin. And for Jesus to redeem us back to God, he had to suffer our punishment. He became our substitute. He was forsaken so that we would never be. And so this is very interesting. It's not Jesus asking God about that. He's just going over Psalms 22. And some of those who stood there, they heard this, and they're thinking when he said, Eli, Eli, that he's talking about Elijah. So immediately one of them took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put on a reed, offered him to drink. And they're like, don't do this. Don't save him. Elijah will come to save him. Jesus cried out again in a loud voice. And we know that from another book, this is where he says, it is finished. And so now their eyes have been closed to everything, what was taking place with Jesus. But now this is where the script flips. And now this is where we start seeing people realizing, oh, okay, maybe there's more to this story. Because then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split. The veil is this huge veil that separated the Holy of Holies, where God's presence was. And now that Jesus died, that veil was ripped in two, and it was a massive veil. This is not where somebody can just rip it. Where in the time frame that it took, it happened so fast. There's no way that somebody went in there and cut it with any kind of thing. It was obviously cut by God. But the incredible thing about this is he also points out Hebrews 10:20 says that the veil symbolizes Jesus's flesh. When Jesus died, the veil, his flesh, was torn, granting us now direct access to the Father through Jesus. And this is an incredible thing that took place with the veil. And the graves were open. This is crazy. And the graves were open. So the graves opened up, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep or who were dead were now raised and coming out of the graves after his resurrection. And they went into Jerusalem and appeared to many people. What a miracle. Some bodies were raised from the dead and walked around Jerusalem. This has got to be absolute evidence that Jesus is the king. So when the centurions and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that happened, and they feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God, because so many things took place. And so now they're starting to see, okay, something is here. Something took place. Maybe he is the Son of God. And many women who followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, were there looking on from afar. All right. And then here comes the whole burial. We know that this man, Joseph of Arimathea, so this guy, I think he talked a lot with Nicodemus because they spent time together here, especially taking care of Jesus' body. And so here's this guy named Joseph, who himself had become a disciple of Jesus, but he was part of the what was he? Not a Pharisee. He's one of the guys up. So not a Pharisee, not a Sadducee. I think he was part of the temple. Then this man went to Pilate, asked him for the body of Jesus, and Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it with clean linen clothes. And he was doing this with, we see this in another book, with Nicodemus, that they were doing this together. And he laid it in a new tomb, and which he had hewn from the rock, and rolled the stone around, and then they sealed it. And they didn't seal it here at this point, but Mary Magdalene was there, and so they saw this. So this is interesting because now, here, let's look at this. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that while Jesus was alive, how that deceiver, they call him the deceiver, said, after 3 days I will rise. It's interesting that the Pharisees remembered this, but not the disciples. The disciples didn't remember Jesus saying this, but the Pharisees did. Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until that day, so that the disciples don't come by night and steal his body to say that he's been raised from the dead. And then deception will be worse than the first. And Pilate said to them, all right, you have a guard, go your way, make it secure as you know. So this is really interesting because I like what Andrew says. Let's go to verse 60. Is it 60? 64. Let's go to 64. All right. In the Jews' effort to prevent anything from happening that would cause people to believe Jesus was resurrected, they gave people one of the surest proofs of his resurrection. They sealed the tomb so that it would be obvious that it would have been opened. And they obtained a guard of soldiers to protect it. This removes all doubts that the followers of Jesus could have stolen his body. Therefore, Jesus' enemies themselves became witnesses for all of history that Jesus literally rose from the dead. And so in their effort to try to prevent this from happening, they actually sealed it. So, but of course, God is wiser. And so this is an incredible part, and we're going to see now the great news that takes place after and what takes place in chapter 28. It's a very short chapter. It won't take us very long to read it, but man, there's so much in this, and we didn't have time to really dig in. And like I've said previously, luckily we've got several gospels that will reiterate this story, and we can keep getting to more things. But I really love this part that Jesus, he didn't defend himself, and then yet at the end he used the scripture, Psalms 22, to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we know why. It was because God is holy and Jesus became sin for us. what an incredible story. I hope that this whole chapter was a blessing to you. I know sometimes we cheered that Jesus would have been released instead of Barabbas, but it was very good for us that he wasn't, obviously, because we were that Barabbas that was released. And so, well, God bless you guys. Have a great day today. Have a great Monday. Be a blessing out there. And remember, always stay filled up.